Well, people, as you can see, we can rejoice because we finally have a movie that we were actually able to watch in theaters. It was a superhero movie, of course, because what other movies do people actually go to watch in movie theaters anymore? But of course, it was the return of a cultural icon. 10 years since his last solo theatrical release of The Dark Knight Rises. We're here to talk about The Batman, the much anticipated, much talked about movie. I think it's already cleared almost 120 million opening weekend just in general. I'm joined by Chris and Matt. Matt's back from the Batman rankings video that we did earlier this week. Guys, you ready to talk about some Battinson?
Dude, yeah, man. I'm very excited for Pattinson. That's a great little moniker. I love the internet sometimes.
The internet at times. Matt, you ready to talk some Battinson?
Oh, of course, of course.
All right, let's do this. This is the Talking TV, the Batman review. Stay tuned. Guys, we actually have something we're talking about now. We have a superhero movie, which means that we know we're talking about a movie that other people are going to be talking about. And what's even better is we're actually talking about a movie that other people are going to be talking about that's actually good for the most part. I mean, I don't know what kind of your guys' thoughts are on this before we even get in, but I fucking really like this movie, and I was kind of shocked by it. I mean, we probably should have had faith in the process because this is one of the last filmmakers in Hollywood working for a big budget studio system that actually knows what they're doing. But guys, first and foremost, talk about like if you guys were like actually excited to watch a movie in theaters for once, for like the first time in months. This is like the first actual movie that people are watching since the start of 2022, 2 full months into the year.
Yeah, this is my first time in theaters since seeing Spider-Man No Way Home. But before we get into all that, guys, we have one hell of a show lined up for you this morning. If you're just finding us on the airwaves of Twitch, please hit that follow button and stick around. We've already done some great live streams here. We've done a Batman ranking. We've covered Euphoria literally minutes after it concluded. That's how on top of things we are here at the Talkin' TV podcast. We bring on great guests like our friend Matt of Basic Entertainment, and you can see right below Dom and I. Please go follow his YouTube channel. Of course, follow our YouTube channel at the Talkin' TV podcast. Follow us on all the socials. You can see them right below Dom, and hit that subscribe button on YouTube as well. We have a hell of a show today. And yeah, man, it was actually crazy to be back in the theater. I hadn't realized how long I hadn't been there until I realized, oh, prices went up $1 on drinks and stuff, even more expensive than they already were. That's how long it had been since I was at the theater. So, really, you couldn't be any more on it with your description if you tried. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Matt, I mean, I'm sure you've been to the theater more times than we have since the beginning of 2022, but still, you must have been happy to see our guy, Batman, back on the big screen for the first time in his own solo outing. I have to constantly paraphrase that because, unfortunately, of the early Snyder stuff that we had since 2012. I mean,
hey, I love Batfleck. There's no reason to say unfortunately at all.
Chris.
I love Batfleck.
Like a standalone, no other characters.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Batman doesn't need anybody else except his rogues gallery.
And shockingly enough, it's a movie I've been waiting for a while. Something of, a way to go about the character that I've been craving for. And so it seems like all the other filmmakers never went this way, and I'm so happy that they went this way.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit in our Batman rankings video earlier this week, is that we've had so many different versions of Batman, so many different iterations, so many different takes on the character. But the one kind of stance that the internet has kind of taken since really film Twitter became a thing in 2012, ironically enough, when The Dark Knight Rises, the last mainstream solo outing of Batman that we got is that we never really got like a comics accurate Batman. As much prestige and as much love as the Nolan movies brought, the whole big thing about those movies that was always criticized, I never really kind of bought into them, but I understood where they were coming from. Is they're like, okay, these movies are really great, but they don't really capture like the comic accurate Batman. People have been talking for years about, okay, we want the detective Batman, we want a more methodical Batman, we want a Batman that actually has to spend a 2.5 hour long movie solving a mystery in order to try and find something, which for the most part I could probably say is something that we really didn't get with any previous Batman movie per se. They were kind of always a mix between like origin stories and then like kind of these big extravagant like kind of colorful displays we'll put on it. I think it's one of the more kindly things that I can say towards some of those late 90s movies. But I wanted to kick this off before we got into talking about any of the other Batman.
Well, hang on, because then if that's the case, before we jump into the main topic, I just want to expand upon something you said. Yes, this is the first iteration that is true to the Batman that we know as the detective from the comics, but there are plenty, if not more, runs in the modern day where Batman is the farthest thing from a detective. He's literally a mix between Tom Cruise and Mission Impossible. And, like Gotham's like super friendly. I'm going to shake everyone's hand, like go hug him in the middle of Times Square type of character. Like I'm talking Rebirth, I'm talking New 52. Batman couldn't be any more of a teddy bear who has every toy at his disposal. So I think you, as someone who's read many comics, I've read Hush, I've read Long Halloween, I've read Killing Joke, I've read so many Batman comics. He's probably the most read comic book character I've read. What you said is not 100% accurate at all. Back in the day when I've read some of the older black and white comics, especially with Detective Comic, I read the reboot run. Now, in Rebirth they did a good job staying true to the detective nature of Batman, but DC gave Batman not only in Rebirth, which is the current iteration what we're in, which is going to be wrapping up soon, but they gave Batman 2 runs. They gave him Detective Comics to stay true to the original first ever Batman comic ever created. They did that with Superman 2. They carried a new torch for Action Comics, but they also had a Batman solo run, and in that Batman solo run, he's like a big teddy bear who's got gadgets, who everyone loves, who's always on the mainstream news. So you know what I mean? Like, you can't really say that. You can't really say that because there's so many different versions of
There's
Batman.
different interpretations, yeah.
But for the first time in a long time, we got an old school version. I definitely would say the Detective Batman is an old school version, and I'll give you that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, Chris, that kind of bounces me into my first point that I was trying to bring up, which is Matt and I talked a little bit about this on the Batman's ranking video that we did on Wednesday. But I wanted to ask you, first and foremost, I don't really actually know this much about you. I've been very vocal about my thoughts on Batman. What does Batman mean to you? What's the first time you remember reading him? What is kind of your relationship with him growing up? Like, was it just the Nolan movies? Is it more outside the Nolan movies? Like, talk about that first.
Yeah, so again, like I wasn't really like the biggest superhero guy growing up. For me, more so it was I got into comics when I got into film school, and I just got so obsessed with storytelling as a medium, and I wanted to see what this medium was that was so encapsulating for so many people that throughout the course of their entire lives. Like I did read comics when I was younger, but it didn't necessarily stick with me through like young adulthood. I kind of read them as a kid, and it was more so like reading sucked, but I liked that they had pictures. I would flip through the pages. But Batman has been a character that has stuck with me in a different way. Video games. I played all the Batman Arkham Knight games. There were so many great one-off spin-off type of Batman fighter games that came out for the PlayStation 2. My generation was so blessed with like these like movie IP games that were actually good and weren't just there to get your butt into a seat and sell extra tickets. So like he's always been around in my life and throughout my growing up. I will say that my favorite superhero is Aquaman, just because whenever a writer can take Aquaman and make him as a compelling read as Superman or Batman, it is incredible to me. And I'm a DC guy, and I've read some really good Aquaman runs. I've also read some really bad ones, trying to find the really good ones. But like what I'll say is my comparison, which will be a later topic, but my benchmark that I look at when I want to like see can Aquaman be really good is like, can his storyline in this writer's run live up to like a Killing Joke, a Hush? You know what I mean? It's always Batman. I'm always coming back to Batman for like the end all be all of peak superhero storytelling. So, needless to say, I come into this with high expectations and high hopes,
To say the least. And that's before we even get into the actual filming aspect itself. So, look, we've all sat down. We've all seen this movie. This movie's 3 hours long. This movie's a long movie, 2 hours and 56 movie. It's 2 hours and 56 minutes. And Matt, I wanted to start it off as the youngest one here, as as part of the generation that has been the most vocal whenever we get something that is longer than the standard 2 hours. Did you feel this movie's runtime like even a little bit while you were watching this?
I definitely felt it. But I mean, the narrative and the overall plot can be so interested. So I really didn't feel like, oh, what am I doing here? What we're doing? Maybe like some instances in the third act, which is a bit of a like. There's like some minor little issues. That's like the only issues I really got in the movie. But no, I didn't feel the the run times like we're just wasting time here. I definitely was engaged with this entire movie.
Yeah, that's probably the most notable standout thing for me, first and foremost, kind of kicking off this conversation, is the fact that he makes a 3 hour runtime that, for me at least, It's not obviously as fast paced, but it makes very good usage of its time, first and foremost.
Yeah.
Like there's not a minute of the movie. Like, I definitely do feel the length, but it's one of those things where I'm never bored watching it. Like, the narrative is compelling, and each piece of the narrative, of this kind of narrative web that Matt Reeves generates throughout this movie, I feel like is important and actually like does push its way towards a conclusion. And it does have a theme ultimately that it's playing off of. It is ultimately trying to tell a story rather than just kind of be a commercial or set up for the next, however many franchises. Now, well, Matt Reeves has gone on the record to say that he does plan on making more Batman movies and that he does kind of have more stories that he wants to tell within this world. This is not like a Marvel thing where this is setting up for like the next 13 different spinoffs or whatever. I know that Warner Brothers has greenlit the Penguin spinoff and everything, but the point being is that this feels like a vision from a filmmaker for what feels like the first time in literally a decade. I don't know if Chris, you have anything that like you want to agree with or refute there, but I don't know. Like, what did you get that feeling from this?
Yeah, I think Matt Reeves clearly has a vision. I think his stylism is very interesting in this one. I mean, from what I've seen him in the past, I think his stylism is just quality filmmaking now is what I'm getting. He suited the character and this version of the character, I thought, very masterfully as a filmmaker. I did feel the runtime, however, not in necessarily a bad way, but also not in a good way. And I did have some frustrations while watching this movie, and especially because this is the movie I've been, asking for so long, really, in what they tried to do and how they really tried to appeal to someone like me who is frustrated with the Marvel bubble. However, I do have some frustrations with the runtime, but it was never because of boredom. I think it's more so critique and personal preference. So we'll have a lot of interesting stuff to talk about here as we unpack that. But I did feel it, but not because it was boring. That's one thing I will say. It was never boring to me, and that I really appreciate with. And it was also, to speak about Matt Reeves, it was also never predictable, which I think is huge because, like I always say, it's the cookie cutter copy and paste. Oh, okay. So shit, we got to get 3 of these out every year. All right, so let's just take Hulk now, drop him in Thor's script, and change item A, B, and C, and then it's kind of different, but also kind of the same. And we didn't have that, which is great, which is really great.
No, we did not have that at all. Like I said, the thing that's been so cool about this whole process, about the explaining it, is it's very clear that Warner Brothers is making sure to have Matt Reeves and all the promo just steer completely away from anything having to do there. Like, they are really trying to escape the bad blood of the Snyder-filled past and all the screw-ups that they made during that time period. Where Matt Reeves, they made sure they had him say on all of those press trails and all of the interviews that he did, he's like, there are no alternative cuts. There is no Matt Reeves cut. This is the final cut. This is the cut of the movie that he wanted to do. They made very, very sure to stay clear of that. And without and kind of like getting into my initial thoughts on the movie, I can definitely say that while this isn't my personal favorite version of the Batman, this isn't the version that appealed to me. This is without a doubt like kind of something new and something refreshing, while at the same time like just putting the emphasis on the filmmaking and the world building first and foremost, more than anything else. Like, this is not a movie that you go into in order to be like, okay, I can kind of recognize some source of familiarity there. Like, you go in and you almost feel like you're watching like something that you truly never have seen before. And what's interesting too is kind of the choice that he takes to go backwards and do a different kind of an origin story, because what's the thing that most everybody complains about now with superhero movies? Oh, another origin story. And I like that this is kind of following in the trajectory that we saw with a few of the Marvel movies that we saw come out recently, where even though it's technically the first film with this new iteration of the character, it's not an origin story. This is set. You don't see the parents dying. You don't see the pearls clamoring all over the place like Snyder did in such gratuitous slow motion at the beginning of Batman vs. Superman. You don't see any of the, you don't see him training in Tibet. You don't see him finding the Batcave. You don't see any of that in this movie. It's set immediately after 2 years of him fighting crime, 2 years of him being the Batman, 2 years he's already like developed a little bit of a rapport with the Gotham Police Department. This is a very vastly different Gotham Police Department than you saw in the Nolan movies, and the film follows him as he tries to track them.
I'm sorry, I wouldn't say he's developed a rapport with the police department.
Somewhat.
He's developed a rapport with Jim Gordon, and only Jim Gordon.
With Jim Gordon, pretty much. His relationship with the police department is, let's say tenuous at best, is what I'll say. And he spends the rest of the film, pursuing the Riddler, who's kind of orchestrating these kind of like Seven-esque, murders around, the rich and powerful and elite. And let's just start there with the filmmaking and kind of the filmmaking approach that Matt Reeves chose to bring to this movie. Matt Reeves has had a little bit of an interesting direction to Hollywood. He got his start directing a movie called The Pallbearer after coming off of directing a few episodes of J.J. Abrams' Felicity as Chris says he comes from the kind of the J.J. Abrams school of filmmaking. And after that, he kind of helped to, let's say in a strange way, like start to capitalize on the internet's effect on filmmaking, on feature filmmaking in general with Cloverfield. Then he followed that up with a American remake of a very well-known Swedish vampire film called Let Me In. It's a remake of the original Swedish Let the Right One In, before taking over the Apes trilogy, the reboot Planet of the Apes trilogy from Rupert Wyatt, and directed the last two, Dawn and War for the Planet of the Apes, both of which are extremely critically well received, if I could actually speak for once. So I think it's safe to say that his filmmaking speaks for itself. But Chris, I wanted to start here. What do you think was the most notable thing about Reeves' filmmaking style as far as like helping to set this movie apart from like a lot of the other superhero ilk?
I think we have, even though he's a younger incarnation of Batman, I think we have a very mature, very pinpointed, as far as this character knows what he wants, iteration of Batman. I like the dichotomy here of exploring a Batman who's only 2 years into his crime-fighting vigilantism, and yet is so new and so novice in that regard, right? Like the whole opening sequence is about how much crime there is going on in this iteration of Gotham, and yet he can't be everywhere at once. And that's a burden that he's dealing with, and he's traversing the mental ramifications of that because it's killing him that he can't be everywhere at once. He has to pick, well, which should I leave to the cops? What can I handle? And he literally says something like that. And I think that's such a deep and profound sort of dark night of the soul, pun intended, type of moment there, where he is really from the gate, out of the gate, struggling. And yet he's so locked into what he wants that it's crazy to see a character who is so motivated and whose motivations are so clear. You can just reach out and grab them. That's how in front of his face they are. And yet he does have all this internal struggle. And I like the learning to be a hero story when it's done with this level of realism. And so I think what Matt Reeves does is he plays to that very strongly. But he also knows that Bruce Wayne is, a rich billionaire and nothing about him is cheap, right? Like even though he's learning how to be a superhero, he will get there. And so his filmmaking reflects this maturity and elegance that I think Bruce Wayne sort of has as opposed to other superheroes. Bruce Wayne is, he's of high society. And I like how we kind of like get some storytelling through the lens in this movie, which I think a lot of superhero storytelling has lost, is the show don't tell, the mise en scène, sort of like, we're not just watching these pretty looking people in the center of the frame. It's everything around him that I think sort of helps paint and articulate the picture, which I think Matt Reeves really did a great job of. Especially that's why I sort of bring up the fact that I think his filmmaking is, you can't really say it's one thing or another because everything he's done is very different, but he always fits, I think, the mood, the tone of what he's going for perfectly, at least in what I've seen him do. And again, he's done that here. Matt, what about you? What's your sort of take on like Matt Reeves' touch and approach to this film?
Yeah, he definitely immerses me in this entire movie. Like Gotham itself just looked amazing. I was kind of interested in seeing how would this director kind of approach Batman, knowing that he is seems like he's passionate about the character, seems like he's had some great work before with the Planet of the Apes trilogy and Cloverfield and all that. What's different? What's going to be the thing that's going to be appealing from this Batman from the other ones? And I thought taking it to year 2, taking it to a younger Batman, taking it to solely a Batman focused movie. I mean, this is more of a character study on the Batman character more so than Bruce Wayne. And just overall, like scenes of him just taking his time, dragging it out. And it's not going to this movie is not going to be for everyone, especially now how the norm of, movie going is, and especially superhero movies is not going to be for everyone. But I appreciate that he went there in certain scenes. And overall, like you see something like in the Batmobile chase scene, a lot of big other studios would have gone with a CGI heavy route, a route that looks kind of fake and is going to look dated in the next, 5 years. He kept it very practical, and, he just did some nice shots here and there with that chase scene. So overall, I think he added, something. He doesn't add like that big spectacle that Nolan added, but he didn't really need to. I mean, Batman is just a ground enough character where you don't need to add something like that. And he wasn't focus on a big spectacle. Let's put the action first. Use more, drama first, the mystery first, on all that stuff first, instead of all the other stuff that people want to see.
That's an interesting point that you bring up, because obviously, the direct comparison that's going to come to everyone's mind are the Nolan movies, but I find it really interesting how I would say even kind of more so than the Nolan movies, which is hilarious to me to say, because I feel like the Nolan movies did this so well. This was such a crucial part of them. Is this really does feel like a focus on Bruce Wayne first and foremost. Like every Batman movie previously, and Matt, you and I talked about this a little bit, it always felt like Batman is constantly like, it feels like the entirety of Batman's history in cinema has been having to overcome and like constantly playing second fiddle to his villains, where his villains end up feeling like the main characters in the story. But like what's it called? The Nolan movies obviously drastically improved on that. With Batman, the joke that everyone makes is that Batman Begins feels like the first Batman movie actually about Batman. But even in the Nolan movies, the villains were such a big, crucial part.
Over.
Exactly, to the point where they end up taking over. The Joker. He's the thing that everyone still talks about for the Dark Knight. Bane, people are still doing the Bane impressions to this day, 10 years later, from the, I'm going to do that every chance because it's the best. It's one of the best impressions to get. But this movie, like, you really do spend almost like every minute of this movie with Bruce Wayne. And when he's not on the screen, it's like how many minutes total of this movie was Bruce Wayne not on the screen? It wasn't very many, just to be in general. And like, I like the way that like, Matt Reeves is able to consistently make this about Bruce Wayne's torture without it ever feeling pretentious or weighty or feeling like you're spending too much time in his head. And the thing that I also really, really appreciate is the fact that he was kind of able to toe that line. And this is probably like my biggest takeaway from the movie, between, I would say, like having the most allusions to the comic book, because like the movie has a very comic booky nature around it. Like if you just listen specifically to the lines that they're saying, forget how they're being delivered, but the lines they're saying, they are kind of corny, kind of ridiculous comic booky lines. There's not like a whole lot of like kind of like really super heavy stuff as far as that goes, but like it's the fact that they're so committed to this vision, to this look, that really helps to sell it. And I think it's ultimately the kind of the final proof in the pudding, in that great filmmaking and great storytelling doesn't necessarily come from having the most real to life thing, because this is a comic book and it shows, hey, you can have a different iteration of a comic book. Just in general, it doesn't all kind of have to be like the one uniform thing, which, Chris, I know that jumps ahead a little bit, but I don't know if you had anything else to like talk about with that.
No, I think it's a great sort of segue, a concluding thought on our first topic to the next topic. So before we do that, guys, please hit the follow button, subscribe if you're watching this after the fact on YouTube, leave a comment, hit that bell so you get notified. Of course, hit the follow button on Twitch. We'd greatly appreciate it. We go live every Sunday morning, so you can expect weekly broadcasts from us. I was going to say podcast, but on Twitch, they're called broadcasts. A lot of terminology to learn, guys. And with that being said, of course, go and follow our guest, Matt of Basic Entertainment. He's on all of the socials as well on YouTube at Basic Entertainment. And yeah, so Dom, what you said is a great sort of topic. I wanted to transition into a question for topic number 2. And my question is, does Gotham need a vigilante? And so this question really, I want to encompass a little bit of what we hinted at by Matt Reeves' touch, but now we can sort of keep Matt Reeves in the conversation, of course, but we can sort of expand to all the other elements that help to contribute to the tone, the mood, the feel of this film. And I think one of the things that Matt Reeves did with this movie was he made Gotham for the first time feel like a character and not just a playground for our superheroes to go and break buildings and smash them up and destroy them, for the first time in a long time. Because there have been other superhero movies that have done that, except Matt Reeves did it with such a realism that I think was appreciated. Like, this is what New York is going to turn into in a few years, and it also is what New York was in the 80s. And I think so it begs the question, does Gotham need a vigilante, and do they want a vigilante? It doesn't seem like they want one. This movie strangely has like this anti-police narrative where it's like, oh, the mayor who's running for office has like this protest where she's like, yeah, the problem is we have too many cops. And it's like, really? Because there are people getting beat up left and right. Batman says literally in the first scene he can't be in more places at once, and it's killing him because people are getting killed, that he can't be everywhere at once. So it's just so strange to me that like the city is in such peril, and yet Hollywood just thinks to, less people to fight crime is a good thing. And they'd also do a good job, though, on the flip side, taking the Serpico route showing how corrupt the city really is, showing that there's corruption at all levels, from the higher ups to the bottom ups. They all come together at this club. This nightclub, the club within inside the club, is where anyone who goes outside in the city and nights around for holiness and godliness, well, they all have their demons, and they're kept in the depths of a club within a club, in the basement, in the underbelly of Gotham. And I love that, because if you're going to say that we don't need cops in a city where people are getting beat up left and right, I think you at least should show why. And they did that. They kept it fair. I will say they did keep it fair, but it just felt like Gotham was too real of a character to what I watch on the news. And I think it was almost like alarming in a sense, where I was like, damn, this is where we're going. Because I'll be honest with you, I was recently in New York City and I did not feel safe at all. The first time ever not feeling safe traveling in New York City. It just felt like people were just unruly. There was people arguing about to wear a mask, to not wear a mask. Like, just everyone just seemed so on edge and so tense in it. Like, watching this movie, I was like, whoa, I was just there last week. Like, I lived, this is a comic book movie, but I just lived this in real life. And it was so authentic and so real, which I appreciate it for. But then it also kind of shows like the harshness of reality, where it's like, if we don't rein this in, are we going to have like a Riddler type person in real life? I hope we don't. But we've seen in the past that there are serial killers who inspire people to go out and follow them, like a Charles Manson, like this stuff does happen. And it also felt a little bit like Saw in that regard, with the way the Riddler, even though it was a PG-13, we could imagine, right? With those rats that run up to the guy's face, we could imagine what happens there. And I'm almost glad they didn't show it, because spare us the details. But I think Matt Reeves almost was like too effective with the way that he built the mood and this character of Gotham as like a character, not just a battleground for them to stomp around in. And I think for me, I was frustrated by that, because like at this point in time, guys, I'll just be honest with you, I don't even consume politics at all anymore. I'm just so frustrated by literally all of it. And I just didn't want to be reminded of it, especially in a Batman movie. But I think that's why I said I was frustrated with the runtime, but it by no means meant it was a bad runtime. It was just like so real and so honest that I was like, damn, like, this is a strange commentary to get in a superhero movie, and this is a strange feeling to get from a superhero, because I didn't expect them to be so true to what's happening right now in the world. It was, I don't know, like, what do you guys think about sort of this topic of mine? Does Gotham want a vigilante? Because I want to know what you guys think.
You know what I get from that whole segment? To me, it gets that Matt Reeves actually understood and was able to do compellingly what Joker a few years ago was unable to do. Because the problem to me that Joker had was that Joker, because it was so focused and one-sided, it didn't feel like you were getting all of the proper issues, all of the proper like kind of looks and examinations, right? Because my whole thing is, I'm like, look, because I agree with you, Chris, 100%. I'm like, if you're gonna do a social commentary, you better get it from all sides and all perspectives, because if you're missing even one crucial piece, the whole thing falls apart. And as far as I'm concerned, in this one, you got it. Because if anything, you could say that was almost part of Matt Reeves's like vision as far as what he was trying to accomplish. Is like, okay, if I'm gonna like show exactly why, like the whole thing about Batman is spiritually and symbolically tied to Gotham. It's why he can never kind of give up and put away the cowl. It's why if anything, like I said, it's what this movie kind of adds to the Batman mythos in cinema, is that we've never really gotten this iteration of Batman that actually, we hear all the time in every other Batman movie, even the Nolan movie, how the city is falling apart, but like we never actually see it. And this is the first movie where we actually get to see it, where the social commentary is actually on full display. You see the decadent, not the decadence. Oh my
Degradation.
God, there we go. You see the degradation. You see the despair. You see everything's falling apart. You see everything miserable. Like, I got this look, and it actually felt like for the first time ever, Gotham is a character. Because it's like every time you see the shots of Gotham in the Nolan movies, I love them, but it's like, come on, guy, that's Chicago. You're not fooling me here. It's like, and everything looks so clean and pristine. And again, that's part of the fun. That's part of the fun of the Nolan movies. But like this, like as far as like what people say, like, what sets this apart? This is what sets this apart. The fact that Matt Reeves is actually trying to make more of a social commentary. And that even goes to as far as like kind of the whole serial killer aspect with the whole Riddler aspect as well, because it's very clear that in addition to being inspired by followers like Manson and, and Jim Jones and Koresh and all the other ones that kind of inspired all those followers, now he's obviously be kind of, in a strange way, he's kind of taking a page from Joker's book as far as like, okay, we know that there are people like this out there in the real world. We know that there are people that inspire like these giant followings, again, through simple social media. If anything, it's kind of strange because that was almost like the most, if anything, the thing that took me out of it, because the film it's so weird because the film felt so classical in nature and it's looking with how the characters were all carrying it that whenever somebody would pull out a smartphone, I would always be taken out of the movie completely because it was
I
like
agree.
because the movie itself felt so anti-modern. But then you realize like, oh no, you need that because literally like that's the thing that's kind of grounding this in the modern day. Because the whole thing about the Riddler is that to me, in a strange way, was the most cinematic element because that's the part where it's like, okay, now we know Matt Reeves is not making like a grand spectacle. He's making a David Fincher movie, and it shows because, man, I mean, if you look at just David Fincher, like everything he was able to do between, the serial killers that he brought to life, David Fincher is such a kind of like, the father of almost like modern day, like kind of, like thriller horrors in that sense, like realistic horror between his work on Seven and Zodiac. And then obviously his whole take on Mindhunter and Netflix. And that was all over this movie as far as, kind of like generating the intrigue around the Riddler character. And that's before we even get into the rest of the crime lord tackles in Gotham, such as, and I want to talk about this too because this movie really does like have some of the best performances that I've seen in a minute. John
We
Turturro's
will. That's also a part of this topic. But
Yeah.
before we do that, Matt, you spoke about the practicality, which I thought was such an amazing point. Where I think Reeves choosing to go practical on this one suits the character, suits the mood, the feel of the city. What's your take on sort of what we're talking about here with the whole policing element, Gotham being a character, the way they brought it to life? Like, because you're in a completely different state than Dom and I. You're seeing a whole different part of the country. Like, what's your take on this type of stuff?
It was needed. It was definitely needed for especially for a character with Batman where you can go in those routes. Definitely filmmakers love playing with Batman because he has this kind of like pulp noir nature of him, and definitely here it was shown with Gotham. But yeah, like Batman itself in a way kind of motivated some of the stuff that was happening in a sense with when we I don't know, we're talking spoilers here, but with Riddler and stuff. So it was the approach of how Batman wanted to go. But like I said, man, Gotham City itself just was amazing. It didn't feel like like Don was saying, Chicago, Pittsburgh, right, that Nolan was using, or kind of like too over the top with Tim Burton. It felt the right enough the groundedness of what Reeves wanted to do with Gotham City. And the whole police stuff, they show both of the coins, and they leave a lot of doors open for how they want to approach that in the future series, and how they want to approach it with characters starting to step into the characters that we all know love, like Jim Gordon and the Batman and Catwoman and all that, Penguin. So yeah, it leaves a lot of doors open.
Yeah, totally. So, Matt, why don't you take us into the second part of this question? Why don't you talk about the performances, the Jim Gordons, Pattinson's Batman, Catwoman? Like, let's talk about the characters, man. Start us off here.
Yeah, so Robert Pattinson's Batman, coming into the movie, I know a lot of people were like, oh, Twilight Boy. But I was like, no, he's been in some great movies, and he's a great actor. And he delivers a really broken down Batman where it's to the point where his Bruce Wayne looks so brooding. I'm like, okay, if they're at the funeral and they know kind of some of these cops know how Batman looks, and they look at this guy's like, oh yeah, I might start making the connections. Maybe this guy, what's Bruce Wayne doing? He's so secluded. He's like stuck in his mansion.
Like, oh, he's still got a little bit of eyeliner on right there.
Yeah, especially with the one cop who he's like, hey, I can't, we're not gonna let you in. But then he sees him, he's like, oh, Bruce Wayne and all that. But no, he delivers that and kind of like. And the reaction of his, facial expressions, and love the details of, Robert Pattinson is the best looking Batman. He really is. His jawline matches, the jawline you see from like a classic interpretation of Batman in comics, which, it's art. You could just make anyone look perfect. But Robert Pattinson just has that perfect jawline, and his eye acting, which, I'm glad they have like eyes, in this instead of, just put white eyes, or let's actually make the mascara canon and stuff in the movie.
Mascara canon. That's a good one.
That's really funny.
Other ones you see Michael Keaton take off his mask, puts it back on, he has it on. It just, it's like embrace the makeup. But no, Robert Pattinson delivers that. Jim Gordon is probably my favorite. Jim Gordon is Jeffrey Wright. I love the delivery in some of his lines. It seems like him and Batman were tight knit. In this movie also too, with Matt Reeves going back, he established the world of the Batman character. He knows that you've seen it, that these characters, you've seen the Nolan movies, he knows all of that. So Jeffrey Wright, Jim Gordon, Colin Farrell's Penguin, I was shocked because half of the time I was like, oh my God, this is Colin Farrell. There's this guy and he's all in his makeup. And I thought he was great. His delivery, some of his jokes were on point. The humor in here, touch on that. Not going to feel dated in a couple years. It was like dark humor. It felt like Wright needed in certain spots. Selina Kyle, like everyone here, and Paul Dano's Riddler was,
Yes.
He was pretty amazing. I mean, he's not the personality of a Joker that can just be entertaining to watch, but there was parts where I was like, wow, this was did he lost his voice after that part and stuff. So overall, I think this cast matched the directing of Matt Reeves, and I'm all happy with the cast. Besides maybe Andy Serkis'
I'm gonna get to that.
I thought he was okay.
I have a point that I'll bring up there because I had a feeling I'm like,
no Michael Caine.
Andy Serkis is the most underwhelming part of the cast, but I'll get to that in a bit. My whole thing as far as Pattinson's performance as Batman, and I think the thing that really solidifies that performance, besides the fact that it's like, look, I've been saying this for a couple years now, and now if everyone can officially say, fuck everyone who said that Pattinson wasn't going to be able to pull this off. Okay, well, let's put that one to bed. I'm putting that right in there with the animation isn't taken seriously. We're putting those all in the same room. We're locking the key. We're throwing that shit out. Animation is taken seriously as a serious, legit form of storytelling, and Pattinson is a fucking incredible actor. That just solidifies that first and foremost. Okay, we're good there. So the only other thing that I'll say is that Pattinson does a really good job of straddling the line between broken and damaged while still being kind of emotionally kind of compromised and inexperienced. Because the thing that I think is the most telling from this movie is the fact that he is still inexperienced and he is still learning. And that's such a hard thing to pull off with Batman as a character because he has been around for so long, because we are so familiar with him, literally to the point where it's like part of almost like the fun of watching that first Nolan movie was the fact that he kind of knew who was everyone that was corrupt already. And so as a result, he could kind of come at them without really any repercussion because they didn't know who he was. And he was kind of the only guy that knew that. But as far as like kind of like this version of Batman, like Pattinson's Batman, he understands about the corruption in the city, but clearly not to the extent that he should. And he's not seeing the way that all the webs come together. And that's what kind of makes the mystery part of the film so compelling as well, is the fact that we are kind of learning about this new world with him, which is something that in a strange way we kind of didn't get with the Nolan, with the Christian Bale movies, which I'm like, for him to pull that off, I'm like, okay, kudos to him there already. That's just with Pattinson in general. Let me get into the rest of the villains and the rest of the cast. Like Jeffrey Wright, what I'll say, once again, kind of works in the same way that Pattinson does, in the same way that he's still kind of learning. He's still kind of on the up and ups. We see him once again as a lieutenant. He's not the commissioner yet. Like Matt Reeves is very clearly still establishing this world as like these characters have only been doing this for a few years. These are not characters with the exception of a few, right? These are not characters with the exception of a few that have been around for a long time. Like obviously Falcone's been around a long time, but Falcone's always been a legacy character within the world of Batman, but like the way that they kind of like showed, even though, the Penguin is still kind of up and coming, the Riddler is just starting out, Catwoman, like in a strange way, I feel like even though I love what they did with Anne Hathaway in The Dark Knight Rises, this is kind of like almost like the more fully realized, like they were actually able to take the time and explore every aspect of every character's arc, which is why I think that even though I like Anne Hathaway's performance more, I think Zoe Kravitz is the more fully realized version of that character. And I mean just the villains in general, like both the ones that we actually got in this movie and the ones that are set up for the next one. We'll get to those in a little bit. I mean, fucking give them all the awards right now, because these are already some of the best goddamn performances of the year between Farrell, not just the makeup, just the fact that he's so committed 100% to that character in a way that he really hasn't been for a couple years now. And Dano, like, I was fully expecting that type of a performance from Dano because I've seen him give that type of performance before, but to just see it utilized so well, like kind of, kind of like the screaming, more like, baby face, immature, kind of high-pitched version of him. It's like a perfect amalgamation of like his There Will Be Blood character and like some more other twisted characters that he played in Batman. I don't know, Chris, what was some of your takes on the performances in this movie?
Yeah, so I asked Matt while you had stepped away in the pre-stream lobby. I said, hey, look, no spoilers. I don't want to taint any opinions here, but I am curious. Like, are you a thumbs up or a thumbs down? He gave me the thumbs up. I went like this. I gave him the thumb sideways. And it's because I think we're getting to the point where my frustrations start to meet one of my earlier criticisms where I noticed the runtime and I felt it. And I think the versions of these characters we got are amazing. and they're performed so perfectly, but they all feel, aside from Riddler, they all feel so one-dimensional. And I get it. It's the tone, it's the mood of the film. It's supposed to be dark, it's supposed to be brooding. It's supposed to have this sort of underbelly of there is no hope. Batman is the hope, but yet we're watching him sort of pick himself up out of his own dark night of the soul. I mean, we're quite literally meeting him as he's just finally trying to make a difference after years of just, suffering from what happened to his parents. But I just felt like we didn't get enough for me to say definitively that this is my favorite Batman performance, or that this is one of my all-time Pattinson performances, because it did feel very one-dimensional. And as someone who knows how much Batman can offer, I think that it was not upsetting, because I'm okay with sort of taking this direction, but there wasn't enough of the human element to this character. I did actually like how we got more time spent in the Batsuit than we did as Bruce Wayne. However, I felt when we got Bruce Wayne, there wasn't enough humanity there. And I understand it's a very cold, dark Batman story. He's clearly a more scarred Batman than we've seen in the past. And they all are to a very deep extent, but him especially. And I think Pattinson played that perfectly. But I just felt like this movie was more concerned with the aesthetic, with the tone, rather than with making these characters feel like characters that you want to watch sort of overcome and triumph. And specifically, I felt that way with Selina's character, the Catwoman. I felt like she was just there to offer a forced love interest, to give something to keep you going if you were not a film critic in the audience like we are, just to keep you, oh, okay, there might be some romance, because this is so dark, this is so depressing, it's so dreary. And I just don't think that that was justified with all the amazing filmmaking around it. I think, like, I love the long shots. I mean, that opening sequence was very artistic and very creative. You could probably cut it and just go right into the mayor being murdered if you wanted to sort of expedite the process. But I like how the movie is almost saying, like, hey, we're going to have you watch just how sadistic the people who work within this city are. We're going to have you watch the killer work his way up to getting into the mayor's house while his family's home and murder him. Like, we're going to show you the process, which is sick and twisted. But it was all very one-dimensional. It stayed in that dark, brooding, dreary realm. Jeffrey Wright also is another actor who has not worked for me in anything I've seen him in outside of No Way to Die. Now, I will say, there's a few performances that I know I have to see that I haven't. I haven't seen Boardwalk Empire. And I also haven't seen the Hunger Games, which I heard he is a small part, but brings some stuff too that make those movies work, like as like a passing the torch. I haven't seen some of his like performances that have helped put him on the map in his earlier years. But from when I met him in Westworld, he was nothing but boring. I hated his character. I think he gives the same performance every time. I get it. You need that guy who's like got a face you like to look at and can deliver like the growly lines. But is that all he can do? I don't know. It also, another thing I think that the characters didn't benefit from, which is crazy for me to say because this is something that I have been dying for, which is we know Batman's story. We don't need to hear it 90,000 different ways. So I love that we just went off of our preconceived knowledge of Batman and his origin. However, there wasn't enough emotional threads to make me really feel when Alfred had got the bomb. Like, I understand you don't need to give us an origin story, but you should still show their camaraderie in some way, shape, or form. You should still show that he is his, surrogate father. You didn't really have those moments. You had, Batman underappreciating him and pushing him away, but you should have had some, in my opinion, to make that moment when Alfred almost dies, you should have had some, like, I'm trying to get through this kid, I won't give up on him. I didn't really get that. You also didn't have some of, like, why did they start to fall in love? It almost felt like season 2 of Lost when they were like, hey, we're throwing too much sci-fi in here. So for the normies who don't like sci-fi, we got to create a love triangle. Okay, Sawyer, Jack, and Kate, they're the 3 prettiest members of the cast. Let's just make them start loving each other for no reason. So for all that Matt Reeves accomplishes in creating something that is different from what we get, which I'm so thankful for, I think he does also do what all superhero storytelling does nowadays, which is leave good filmmaking somewhat at the door in regards to like the characters' connection in the overall arcing story. Like, it all felt more like a social commentary, which I think we all agreed is a much needed social commentary. I mean, I love how he's playing it so fair. Never have I seen Hollywood ever do that when it comes to policing. I was blown away, but it's showing all sides. But I just feel like he simultaneously needed more time in a movie that felt too long. But it's not that I didn't like it. I just have to be honest. I can't
So
be the
you
one guy
feel-
who's
Yeah,
gonna like.
I get you.
So you feel that, given that this movie was almost a little bit, almost like kind of almost too reliant on your familiarity with the Batman mythos, so you feel like you didn't get as much from this movie as opposed to more so just like, okay, you're familiar with the characters, therefore I feel like I'm not getting as much that this movie is telling me or showing me at least about them.
Here's the too long, don't read. It felt one note, and I think that we needed elaboration to justify some of the emotional climaxes we hit in the third act, and it was like a lot of like relying on our knowledge that obviously we all know Batman's story, but I just felt like because of that, so it's strange. Like we wouldn't have been able to explore some of the areas that we would have had this been an origin story, which I'm so glad we got to explore the dark, dreary, depressing, angsty nature. But I also felt like because of that, the characters should have come in with like bonds that should have been there that weren't. If you're assuming we have this knowledge of how they function and how they act, we should have
Yeah,
had that.
Not to cut you off, but I was pretty shocked how they just really just throw in the world of Batman. I was like,
Yeah, I was okay with that. I loved that.
I loved it, but you gotta still think about the critics that are gonna look at this and be like, okay, this is not your typical superhero movie. Let's take it more serious when we're critiquing it. That are they gonna be in some way confused? Are they gonna be kind of like, oh, we need a little bit more of the pretense of when he becomes Batman and all that? Do they need something like that? And I was kind of wondering about that.
That's a great point, and I wasn't confused at all. Obviously, I know Batman's
Yeah.
mythos inside out. For me, it was I wanted to feel attached to something that was so new and something I've been screaming for, and yet I couldn't because where we picked up, it didn't feel like we picked up where we left off. Like it didn't feel like we had assumed there was an origin story, and so we know the collaboration between Alfred and Bruce would be there. We know the city's in bad shape, and we know that Gordon's his only hope. Like the only really it just felt like we were just thrust into a world and we had to figure it out, which is cool. A little Blade Runner in that sense, to harken back to another neo-noir film. But in that regard, it was like in Blade Runner, we at least pick up the pieces along the way, and the characters do eventually form bonds that are meaningful and impact the final narrative. And at the end of the day, the only bond that really felt meaningful was, thankfully, the one we saw the most of, Jim Gordon and Batman. But still, no change came. I felt the characters ended and here's what I'm trying to say. I felt the characters ended and started in the same exact place. So where was their emotional journey? I didn't feel we went on one. I felt like the city of Gotham went on one, and that's why I wanted to talk about it as a character, which is cool. Different type of filmmaking, just not what I was hoping for, because I was so in love out of the gates with everyone's performances, but I was so sad that they didn't progress. There you go. That's how I was trying to say it.
That's
Thank
actually
you,
a good
Matt.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. The only thing that I'll say, like, I get where you're coming from as far as the rest of the characters, but if anything, the only thing that I'll say as far as Batman's arc is, if anything, Batman kind of grows and shifts with the city, where the beginning of the movie, he's almost like kind of trying to figure out like kind of what exactly he can do in the city that is so consistently falling apart, and then by the end, he's like, okay, he's like kind of almost like at peace with that in a strange way. It's like understanding like, okay, I'm clearly not going to be able to do everything, but at the very least, I'll help out someone. And Matt Reeves definitely just talked about the fact that he is going to like go more in depth and at least try to develop that in future films, which I just wanted to talk about that real quick before we got into our last point, which is the stinger at the end. I mean, he confirmed it. Everyone knows it. We all know. We all know it's the Joker. So, like, I don't know. Are you guys looking forward to seeing? Are you guys looking forward to seeing Druig as our next Joker?
I'll keep it quick and then I'll turn it over to Matt to let him take the stage a bit. Yeah, it's not that I do want to see more. I do want to see more in this world. That's not what I was just trying to say. I'm very excited about all that. I can't wait. I was so glad with that sort of like stinger there at the end. I just got to be honest. That's really it at the end of the day. But I am excited to see more of this world, because this is more of the beat of a superhero story that I was dying for. But Matt, what about you, man? Take the stage on this question.
Yeah, just to go back on it. It kind of, I hope that doesn't become a crutch. And I was hoping that was gonna be a crutch in this movie. Oh, it's just year two Batman, he's inexperienced. I mean, hopefully it doesn't become like that with the progression of like Bruce Wayne, especially in the third act. I would have loved to see like how Batman is talking about I should be more to this city. Well, I would like to see a scene where Bruce Wayne is like helping out the city more, and like one quick scene that would have been nice. But yeah, just talking about that kind of stinger at the end, I was kind of like, okay, this guy's gonna be Joker, and let's see how the performance comes out. I don't think it's gonna be in the next film or anything. Hopefully, they take their time with it, but it is gonna be a thing where it's like, okay, people are gonna be looking at it as, can he match Ledger's Joker? And I feel like it's just gonna be set for disappointing for some people, so they got to take it in a different route. But yeah, I'm excited to see what he brings. He's a young guy, and he's been in some good movies here and there. So yeah,
The only
I'm
thing
all for it.
That's really great that you brought that up, because that kind of is a transition into our last topic, which I know Chris wanted to talk about as far as comparisons to the original. But I mean, like, it's so strange for me because obviously the Joker, he's the best. He might be the best comic book character ever conceived of. I love the way, I love just how unpredictable of a character he is. I love how he's constantly that character that no matter what you do to him, he always gets under your hero's skin, and there's really nothing that you can do. He really doesn't have any sort of emotional attachments at all. He effectively has no weaknesses. He is kind of like the perfect villain if you think about it, and to the point where literally the only thing that allows him to continue to be a villain is the hero's own flaw, which is that he won't kill. And the fact that we're kind of getting introduced to him this way, as far as like kind of, the Riddler being almost a voyeur into him. And also I love, because Matt Reeves talked behind the scenes about how there originally was a deleted scene that he's talked about where Batman, in order to try and find out more about the Riddler, he'd already apparently caught this version of the Joker, but he wasn't yet the fully realized version of the Joker yet. So he came to him in order to like profile him in order to find out more about the Riddler. And my stance on Barry Keoghan, I don't think I've ever had this fast of a turnaround on an actor, because I fucking hated this guy for a majority of stuff. I thought he was so whiny and everything. I thought he always had the same facial expressions. I didn't feel like he was being fully utilized. Even in the movie like The Killing of a Sacred Deer, where he is such a crucial, quintessential part of that, I didn't really feel like it was getting anything else. And lo and friggin' behold, who knew that all it was going to take was the worst Marvel movie in years to make me realize, hey, I like that guy. I could see that guy being in like a better, bigger version of the comic book movie. And now he's the Joker, and I'm like, let's go. So, I mean, I don't know what that says about me and my taste just in general, but like, it's so funny too, because I was watching with my friend. My friend thought it was Two-Face for a second because the way that the shadow caught this car. I'm like, that's not Two-Face. I'm like, there's no shot they'd waste him as Two-Face. And then you hear the laugh. And it's like, okay, it's the Joker. So, Chris, take us home with our final point, which is, of course, why do we feel the need to compare all of our superheroes to previous versions? I mean, I have my pretty definitive stance on this, but I wanted to hear your take on this first.
Yeah, I thought of this one on the car ride home because I found myself doing it, even as someone who claims to be so against that thought process. It's hard. It's hard to fight the overall narrative. It's hard to really decide what do you think versus what do the critics who I see on my Instagram feed, my Twitter feed, my YouTube feed tell me. And so I was thinking to myself, well, let me unplug and just give myself the night to think about this, simmer on this one before I go into my review tomorrow morning. Then I'll go and see what other people think. And so as I was driving home and just thinking about this movie, I thought to myself, well, if I tried to compare it to a Batfleck, I would definitely hate it. If I tried to compare it to a Chris Nolan Batman, I would not appreciate it as much as I should, because I know how that wraps up. And this is seemingly the beginning of a new journey, of a new installment in Batman. And then I thought to myself, well, why do we always bring in other properties in the same cinematic universe when we talk about these IPs that seemingly never end, even though they reboot and restart, like the case of one Robert Pattinson, Matt Reeves, the Batman. And so I was like, I'm almost a victim of my time, even though I claim to not be one. So I thought it'd be an interesting question to pose to the group, because I think if I didn't realize this, I would have come in this morning hating this movie, because it wasn't a superhero story, even though I went to see a superhero movie. It was really a story about loss and heartbreak, and the lengths that will drive you to, in the form of a thriller, sort of like a Serpico in regards to the whole policing issue. And a lot of people have said Seven. I haven't seen that, but I did look up to get the gist, and it does seem like that comparison checks out. Although again, I can't fully make it because I haven't seen that. So I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about how it almost ruined this movie for me. And even though I don't love it, I'm glad that I came to that conclusion on my own. So I just kind of wanted your guys' take on that. Why do we compare?
I mean, it's always kind of inherently going to be there as far as just within the age of the internet, because a lot of people on the internet, especially when it comes to big IPs, especially now because we have so many different variations of those IPs, it's, people are always going to inherently bring it back to the one like kind of definitive version, like you kind of see this in a strange way with Star Wars too, where it's like you constantly are always trying to bring it back to the version of it is that of, like people who grew up with the originals, they're always going to compare it back to the originals, and people who could watch the prequels and at the turnaround of the prequels, they're always going to try and bring it back to that. So they're always going to try and, because the problem is that Hollywood, at least for a long period of time, was not in the business of constantly remaking and rebooting stuff. So we didn't have all these different variations and versions of these characters. We really only had the one definitive version. And so the interesting thing about Batman is really one of the first franchises kind of before the whole internet takeover / Marvel takeover of movies to have multiple iterations and multiple versions. So if anything, you could almost make the argument that people inherently comparing this version of Batman to previous versions has kind of always been there, because even going all the way back to Keaton, the people who watched that and were already grew up, they were like, what? Keaton? That's not the Adam West thing that I grew up on. Batman's supposed to be campy and corny and cracking one-liners and having these, gigantic, like kind of like crazy TV setup, because so that's kind of, I feel like that comparison that you talk about as far as comparing different previous versions is almost baked into the nature of Batman. As far as kind of the bigger IP argument in and of itself, that just comes from the fact that because everything is inherently remade now, you're going to come to that. It just so happens that we kind of live in an age where a majority of the remakes are not good at all, and the thought process is just not put into there at all the way that it is put into kind of original, the original old school versions of things that we see. Like we talk about the remake, you talk about some of the horror remakes, the remakes of The Thing, the remakes of Nightmare, remakes of Friday the 13th that you were seeing at the beginning of the 2010s when they were trying to do all those. Of course, they're not going to have any of the same like kind of gusto that the originals had, because they're just not going to have because there's just not the same thought process there. So I feel like we got to be specific when we're talking about comparing things to previous things. But just as far as Batman goes, that's kind of always inherently baked into the DNA of Batman. And just as far as like, because I mean, if we're just going to talk about the kind of the definitive versions, I mean, the Nolan movies kind of made their stance pretty clear as far as almost like, because those movies were so good in comparison to what came before, that those movies almost like kind of became the definitive version of that. So obviously when you talk about adding any new Joker, you're always going to have, the shadow of kind of Heath Ledger overlooking everything, but that's just specifically to Batman. I don't know, Matt, what's your take on that?
Yeah, especially in this era with let's rank them, let's tier them up, and we need to have a movie where it's like, oh, you can appreciate all three of these characters, right? All of them have their own little.
I mean, Marvel literally made a movie all about that.
Yeah, basically. So it's always the pressure. Like I was just talking about Barry Keoghan's Joker, where it's I hope it's too much. Like I hope people just realize this is the joke. This is a different Joker. Now, let's not say that there's some bad interpretations of characters. I mean, Jared Leto's Joker was just awful, and he was just awful in every standpoint. They weren't even trying to compare, but you always gotta match the quality of the other ones. But no, each actor, each character, each director needs to come in here and have their own little interpretation of it, and try to stick to it as possible. And majority of the time, it's really just about which one you grew up with, your personal connection with it, which one speaks more to you, and and we can all pick and choose. But yeah, I really don't like always comparing them. And it's kind of weird because in a way I kind of have like a Batman burnout, because it's like, damn, we just got Ben Affleck, and I was there for the Nolan movies too. So it's like, wow, I'm seeing a brand new Batman, a brand new character, a brand new, interpretation of the Cape Crusader. And I was like, okay, this was going to add its own little unique flair. And it does. So, yeah, I kind of hate doing the comparing stuff, because majority of the time they're not always going to be the same.
Yeah, especially because like in this current day and age of IP, where we get again like we got 3 different iterations of Batman over the course of not even a full 10 years, because we got Bale wrapping up in 2012, then we got Affleck 4 years later in 2016, and now it's been what, like 5-6 years roughly since Affleck first came on the screen, and we already have Pattinson back. You know, even with the Spider-Man movies, at the very least, I mean, actually, no, yeah, you could kind of make the argument there with the Spider-Mans, but even with the Spider-Man movies, it felt like there was enough like kind of distance and mileage between those castings that it felt like okay. Versus with Batman, it's like because they have been kind of so close together. I don't know, Chris, does that kind of answer your question there?
There's really no answer to this question. I just thought it would be interesting because we also do participate, like Matt said, in the mashing them up, sort of making them battle it out in the top 10 ranked videos. I mean, we do that because it's fun. It is fun. And I don't think there's anything wrong in doing that. I don't think it dilutes you being a film critic at all. But it just was something I was thinking about. And do we even have a chance to come to our own opinions this day and age, or does it happen so fast that we either pick a side, and who determines those sides? And I think you guys raised some interesting insight. That question's really more so for me and anyone else who just likes to study these things from like a more macro standpoint. And so that's part of the fun for me too, the way marketing impacts things and all that. And this movie surely has been marketed pretty heavily, so I figured I'd ask. And so it does, Dom. I think I got what I wanted. There is no clear answer, but what I can say is that the answer so far for our channel in regards to all the changes we've made this year has been going really well, and that's all because of you guys. So thank you everyone who's been here this morning with us on Twitch, and of course everyone who continues to support us on YouTube and all that, and subscribe and like. But before we get out of here, we do have to do our star ratings. So. Yes. Out of 5, why don't we kick it to our guest first? You know, yes. Matt, your star rating for the Batman.
It gets better when I think about it. The second viewing, I enjoyed it a bit more. I catch some of the smaller details they're throwing in there. I'm gonna go into 4.5. 4.5. It's damn near perfect. Not here to say I'm not jumping on tables like this is a bad movie I'm gonna rewatch. That title still goes to The Dark Knight, but it is one that I enjoying just thinking about it right now.
So here's what I'll say for my star rating. I'm gonna read a little bit from my Letterboxd review because of course I got to do some shameless plugs here at Movie Nerd Reviews on Letterboxd, which is that this is a movie that walks a fine tightrope line between the ridiculous and the prestige, and in other words, it's a movie first and foremost. So if the Dark Knight trilogy is the presentation of Batman in like a kind of the prestige action showy way, this film is kind of more of a presentation of what a true artifice Batman really is. It's more Zodiac than Heat. It's not about the thrill and excitement. It's about the slow build to what seems like at first a rather unfulfilling conclusion, which is kind of almost by nature what Matt Reeves is attempted to go for, because if anything, like I can already see the argument being made that the conclusion feels unsatisfactory, but if anything, that's kind of the nature of what he's trying to do with it. So I'm giving the movie this rating, not necessarily for how good of a Batman movie is, but just for kind of how, even if it doesn't work 100% of the time, how much of his guns Matt Reeves sticks to, and how much of a true filmmaker's vision this movie felt like, more so than a lot of the other blockbusters and movies that I've seen in theaters recently. So even though it's not a perfect movie, obviously it's still a 4.5 out of 5 for me, easily. It's like, it was just a true film experience for me, is why I give it that rating.
Nice. Yeah, man. Those are great rationales to justify that rating. I think you guys both have really great points you raised throughout the point of this conversation. For me, I'm going to have to go a little lower than both of you. For me, it's a 3.5 out of 5, and I do plan to go see it again in theaters, and I will keep you guys updated on how I feel about that. And I think I want to go see it again because I really can't say the last time I've seen something like this, but I don't want to let its uniqueness in a genre that has become so oversaturated justify why I should give it a higher score. I think sometimes there is something to say about waiting to review something to get some mileage, as Luke's saying, under your belt, so you can sort of have some reflection and some point of reference instead of just going in with the initial reaction. But that's what we have here. We have our initial reactions. It's the weekend of, and we just saw it recently, especially me just coming off of a last night's viewing. So this is where I'm at right now with it. That is subject to change. But I learned a lot, and my score did go up quite a bit throughout the course of this conversation. And I think a good movie you really never fully put the final pin on. You're always learning something from. So I'm curious to see if that happens with this one. And it was a great time chatting with you guys, of course. Matt is always a pleasant surprise. Matt, why don't you tell the folks where they can find you and keep up to date with all that it is you do on the internet?
Yeah, so Basic Entertainment is basically my movie channel, or comic book more eccentric, a lot of the bigger franchises that I talk about, all the stuff, nerdy stuff, and some Batman stuff coming up. You guys can check it out in the channel this week. Probably like my own thoughts on the movie, and then like a spoiler review and a discussion. With it looks like Luke is in the chat. Maybe we'll tell Luke to jump on board. But yeah, so you guys can go follow me there. And also to Basic Entertainment on TikTok, where it's really at because I'm like posting a lot of content there too. Really like TikTok, really like their stuff. But yeah, of course, always a pleasure to join and having you guys, or you having me on here in the channel and talk about movies and stuff. So thanks once again.
Of course, Matt, we love having you. And of course, be sure to, if you're not already subscribed, head over to our YouTube channel at Official Talking TV Podcast, or rather just Talking TV on YouTube. I'm already getting my things mixed up right there because I'm still so much in awe of this movie. What it pulled off. Talking TV on YouTube. Be sure to click the subscribe button and the like button and the bell next to it. That way you guys get notified every time we put up new content. If you're new to us here on Twitch, be sure to follow us there. Follow us on all of our social medias, myself at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. This guy over here at Christian Ivanko across all platforms. And of course, our main Talking TV podcast, Official Talking TV Podcast across Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of the above. You guys know what to do. Go follow us there for all of the new stuff and updates we have going on. We'll be back next week. We'll be reviewing the new Pixar movie. Once again, Disney Plus bended Pixar over a barrel and showing them the 50 states by dumping all their shit right on Disney Plus. We'll be reviewing Turning Red next week. And as always, people, remember 12 seasons in a short film and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.